right, recording in progress. Nobody pick your nose. Let's see. Okay. All right. I believe that Pam is going to open us this morning with a prayer, and then we'll get started.
Oh God, you made us in your own image and redeemed us through Jesus, your Son. Look with compassion on the whole human family. Take away the arrogance and hatred that which infect our hearts. Break down the walls that separate us. Unite us in bonds of love. And work through our struggle and confusion to accomplish your purposes on earth. That, in your good time, all nations and races may serve you in harmony around your heavenly throne. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen. Great to see you all. Now, I'm going to do something a little bit different this morning. Before we get started, I'm going to take a quick detour, which I'm probably not supposed to do. But biblical scholarship doesn't make the news very frequently, and it did this past week. Some of you may have noticed, some of you maybe did not. Has anyone been following the Jeopardy Tournament of Champions?
Yes.
We've got a few people. Okay. I don't get to watch it because it's on at 3:30 and I'm at work, but I've been following the Tournament of Champions because a friend of mine actually made it into the finals of the Tournament of Champions, which is pretty amazing. His name is Sam Buttrey. So this past week, there was the final Jeopardy clue, which really decided the game. The category was New Testament. So that's cool, isn't it? So the question, let me see if I think I've got the exact question here on my computer. The question was, Paul's letter to them is the New Testament epistle with the most Old Testament quotations.
Oh,
All right. Paul's epistle to them is the New Testament epistle with the most Old Testament quotations. Now, I'm hearing some good guesses. Andrew He responded Philippians. Amy Snyder, who's one of the most amazing Jeopardy champions ever, responded Hebrews. Pretty logical, right?
Yeah.
And Sam Buttrey responded Romans. So what do we think? What's the correct answer? Romans. Now, smart bunch in this room, but the judges ruled in favor of Hebrews. Amy Snyder's answer, Hebrews. So she got it right. She was given credit for the proper answer. Sam lost that game because of his answer. Now, what's the problem with its answer?
Paul didn't write it.
It's presumed that Paul didn't write it, right? So this is modern biblical scholarship, and really, since very early on, people have noticed that the language of Hebrews is not consistent with the way that Paul writes. Not only that, but the clue specifically says this epistle. Most scholars don't even think that Hebrews is an epistle. It doesn't begin with any kind of an address the way that Paul's letters always do. So anyways, doesn't matter. Amy won the game, and the Jeopardy never went back and apologized for. No, I don't think they've ever said anything.
Where do we like to complain? Protest.
So anyways, I thought this was interesting. Yeah.
For a wide audience who would think, well, Old Testament mostly speaking, right?
Right.
Would be attracted to that answer.
Exactly.
So
It was my immediate response before I really thought through the answer, but
Because they're fact checking.
I don't know, but they, this is what they do. They ought to be fact checking their stuff a little bit more carefully than they apparently did with this answer. What's that?
did they say quoted? Which one was, had the most quoted Old Testament?
Yeah,
Well, and so what version of the Bible did they use?
they always, this drives me nuts. They always use King James.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So anyways, there's our little detour into biblical scholarship in the news. And so there's a lot of money at stake in this instance. So he looks a lot like Steve Martin, kind of. Yeah. Yeah. He's a really funny guy. Yeah, he is. He's a really funny guy.
That's not a bus.
They're not giving feedback. Well, they
I
may.
bet they are.
If you look on their Facebook page, the Jeopardy Facebook page, there's a ton of stuff, but I don't think Jeopardy has ever issued any kind of a statement or apology or so that's the way it goes. Yeah. So now back to our story. What we're doing every week, and you're all becoming familiar with this pattern, we're going to start by reviewing last week's story, just a quick recap. And you know, I think the logic behind this, we're trying to really internalize the Bible, the narrative structure of the Bible. So we're just going back and reinforcing what happened last week so that we can then connect it to what we have read about for this week. So just in terms of the narrative structure, the story, what happened last week in the chapter that we read?
God renamed Abraham and Sarah.
Uh-huh. God renamed Abraham and Sarah. What else?
Sodom.
Sodom. We very quickly covered Sodom last week. I think we didn't spend a whole lot of time discussing that. What else? The binding of Isaac. Correct. That's great. Uh-huh. Yeah. Uh-huh.
The relationship between Esau and
That's
Jacob, yes.
that's what we're going to be talking about for today. So yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Anything else?
The story of Abraham and Sarah from about time that they were in their 70s still there, and includes the stuff.
Yep, that's broadly speaking, that's exactly right. The covenant, that's a very important aspect of this story.
And Hagar and Ishmael.
Hagar and Ishmael. Yep. In terms of the events, I think that pretty much covers it. I mean, one of the things that I always focus on towards the beginning of the story is the call of Abraham, or the sending of Abram, however you want to interpret that.
The narrative is trying to establish, I think, a linear, beginning of the story and this and this.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. And that's generally the way that especially the first 5 books of the Bible are struck. They have this great kind of narrative arc, which again is one of the things that we're going to be really establishing by reading this book. Anything else from last week's lesson? I think we've covered it. So let's move to this week. And again, we're going to start by having you all describe what happened in as linear as a fashion as you can. And again, we're not jumping, we're not diving deep right now. We're just talking about the events that occurred. We covered a lot of territory in this chapter, right?
I have a question.
A question? Okay.
Why are some things in italics?
Those are most of the text is direct quotes from the New Revised Standard Version of the Bible. But obviously they had to omit a lot of text. And so the text that they've omitted, they have kind of given a condensed
Captain.
recap of what happened. And so
Okay.
those are what you're seeing in italics.
Okay.
Great question.
You read.
So what happens in chapter 4?
I wrote it down.
You wrote it down? Let's hear it.
Early on, we talk about the birth of Esau and Jacob, Isaac and Rebekah. Then Jacob betrays Esau with the help of Rebekah, incidentally. And Rebekah sends Jacob to live with her brother to get him out of Dodge after he brother's inheritance. Then Jacob has a dream, and God tells Jacob that the same thing, the covenant that he gave to Abraham, he pretty much told him the same thing. This land is yours and all that. Then Jacob marries his cousins, Leah and Rachel. His cousins, his mother's brother's daughters. Jacob wrestles with God, and Jacob is renamed Israel. Jacob and Esau reconcile. Jacob has 12 sons, including Joseph. The brothers don't, Joseph's kind of a little smart aleck, I guess, in the family, and he's loved by his daddy, and the brothers didn't care for it, so they sold him off into slavery, and slave people took him to Egypt. And then, when he gets to Egypt, he interprets a dream for the Pharaoh and becomes a favorite of the Pharaoh. And the Pharaoh makes him the chief operating officer of Egypt. And Joseph does a good job with that. His brothers get hungry and don't have any food. And so they come to Egypt, and Joseph sort of treats him mystery, doesn't tell him who he is and that sort of thing. Anyway, he reconciles with them, and then Joseph dies. That's it.
How's that?
Pretty good.
That's the whole book. That's the whole chapter, about 10 pages.
All right, great recap. Anything else? What would you like to add to that, John?
To me, the most important thing was that Joseph was granted the ability by God to interpret dreams. And that stood him in good stead with everybody except his brothers. They took great umbrage when he dreamed that he was in charge of them. But with the Pharaoh, it's a good thing.
Yeah.
And wasn't he in prison for 2 years?
Something.
Joseph?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Any other details of this story?
What a detail.
Yeah.
It wasn't a wonderful colorful jacket. It was
Oh,
Yeah.
Never thought
Yeah.
that it wasn't so many colors.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, translating Hebrew into English is not easy. They're very differently structured. Many of these ancient Hebrew words, we don't even know for sure what they mean, and we have to guess by their context. So there are a lot of translation issues with regards to, well, all of the Bible, really.
I think the big thing that comes through is that we don't have a corner on dysfunctional families. And the two big things are God communicates through dreams. And that's a big deal all the way through the Bible. And then the other thing is that he doesn't always think in the way we do in terms of what's fair and what's not fair, because it's this theme of the barren women having children that shouldn't be biologically possible. And it's, and then the other thing that comes out of that is that the younger son is the one that always comes out on top. And that was totally not the way things were done. So those, so you have deceit, And an interpretation of dreams is the glue that holds us together.
Great. Those are great points. Thank you for mentioning the barrenness, because again, that's one of the things that happens when you read a lot of this stuff in its narrative form. You start to see some of those themes that we don't notice necessarily if we're reading the Bible in little chunks. So we're told in the italics at the beginning that Rebecca was barren. We just read about that last week, didn't we? With Sarah. So, so yeah, this is a theme that's being reinforced.
I also like that, Joseph, somehow knew or had an instinct that God did have a plan for it. And I think the idea that, all the way through I won't know necessarily God's plan for me, but I can still have faith that he has one.
Yeah, that's great. Great, yeah.
Do we have anybody in this day and age that interprets dreams?
Yeah.
I'm not talking about some of these crystal ball people.
Yeah,
They're psychoanalysts.
Yeah,
yeah. I mean, I think of Freud, just, who really changed the way that we think about dreams. It's a great point.
I think I want to say one thing for those of us who wish we had Joseph-like dreams. But my dreams will not make it in the Bible. And I just say that because, doesn't mean there's something wrong with me. It's just, I'm wired neurologically. My dreams are very difficult.
Yeah.
There's a book that's written about what dreams mean.
And I think I think I have worked with people on my dreams. But I think, you have to take your own story into the context. I mean, you can't just look up in a book and
Yeah.
have it really apply to your particular dream.
Yeah.
Although maybe I guess in Jung's world or whatnot, there are these archetypes or whatever that may show up in your dream, but still has to be filtered just individually. And I didn't want to get us off track, but I just didn't want anyone here to feel bad about themselves. Awesome dreams, where God is revealing amazing.
One thing I took away was back now to Jacob. When he was wrestling with the angel, I wondered if he was wrestling with himself, with his own need for goodness and his need to be blessed. And the hip being, caused him to constantly remember that battle.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. Tell you what we'll do. Now that we've kind of talked a little bit about the kind of what's going on in this chapter, let's go back to the beginning and dive a little bit deeper into each section of the story as it's broken up in the book. And I'll kind of coordinate a discussion on that, and then Pam will take over once we get to Jacob's dream. So let's cover everything that happens up until that dream. What are some of the themes? What are some things that you notice about the story? Is there anything that you noticed that you hadn't really noticed before? This is, again, we're dealing with some very familiar stories here.
I didn't know that Rebecca was really behind the trickery.
Mm-hmm.
I learned something.
Yeah. Parents taking sides. That's a recipe for disaster, isn't it?
Yes.
And the way he tricked his father,
Mm-hmm.
using sheepskins because his brother was hairy.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And his poor dad couldn't see.
Yeah.
I tie back Isaac's praying to the Lord, and the Lord granting his prayer to Abraham. And when God said, don't hurt this son, your son.
Mhm.
So to me, that was God giving his blessing at that time. Which carries, I think, carries far forward into this chapter.
Are you talking about when you said Isaac's prayer, Isaac's blessing?
Yes.
Yes. I guess that's pretty firm. They can't change their mind, even though they find out that they were tricked,
Mhm.
you know? Into believing this was the oldest son.
Yeah,
Yeah. I
Kind of like Jeopardy.
kind of like Jeopardy. That's right. No takebacks, no do-overs. There-
The thought occurred to me that to give away your like inheritance, some food.
Oh, yeah.
And I just see the little bit far back.
Maybe he thought it was a joke.
Yeah,
right. Oh, yeah, I mean, right, it's very far-fetched.
The betrayal over inheritance is a big deal. And, I'm surprised a little bit that God would condone that way, making the transfer from Esau to Jacob.
Well, doesn't that continue to be a theme in our society anyway?
Absolutely. And those of us that've been through it can destroy families.
Well, betrayal in of itself is a biggie. And most of us have experienced the betrayal. And it is incredibly hurtful, incredibly hurtful.
Absolutely. Anything else? I mean, this, one of the things that we're asked to discuss with each of these stories is, what do you find challenging or difficult? And when we really stop and look at these stories, there's a lot that's challenging and difficult in all of them. And this story is no exception.
Well, and it's what goes around comes around. I mean, the deceit of Jacob and Esau, and then Laban does the same thing to Jacob. I mean, you spin your own worst enemy when you do these things, and it comes around to bite you in the end. So the Myers-Briggs profile of Jacob and Esau, I think you could, a very extroverted surface person with Esau, and then a more thoughtful strategic planner, because he does very well. Even though he's in this situation, he plays his cards right and comes out a very wealthy man when they leave. So it's kind of an interesting psychological profile.
Yeah.
Yes, and I was reading an article this week about these stories that says these stories are not about deceit being, kind of its own reward and stuff, but it reminded me that these stories are by people who are very marginal, very poor, and that they have to use everything they can to kind of make it. I found that an interesting point. Hadn't thought about it that way before.
I thought the morals of Jacob having 13 children with 2 wives plus their servants. Obviously, things have changed. We don't even have servants.
Yeah.
Can you imagine the dysfunction under that tent?
And we're again, looking at these stories in compressed form like we're doing, you really see one of the things that jumps out at me is the theme of sibling rivalry. I mean, we're seeing it over and over again. So that's interesting.
We must have had some really funny Thanksgiving dinners.
Well, this is before God did the 10 Commandments, wasn't it?
Correct, yes.
So he hadn't laid down the law yet that you don't marry your cousins and have kids with everybody and all that stuff.
Yeah. Well, yeah, very, very different time, obviously, and I I believe that humans are biologically tribal, and so tribe was very important, and you kept things within your tribe. That's
Yeah.
not the way we do things anymore, but
Yeah.
it made a lot of sense when you're talking about, again, survival in a subsistence economy, competing for very limited resources.
It was also to go forth and multiply aspect.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's just taking us right back to Genesis, isn't it, with that language?
yeah. Fruitfulness is a sign of blessing. Barrenness is a sign of curse. So we're seeing
Mm.
those themes set side by side.
It struck me that Esau and Jacob struggled even in the womb.
Yeah.
And that their mom cried out. I mean, that was, and God told her that they would, they were actually representing two nations, so. I don't know, that's just quite a picture.
It's so vivid.
And what's more painful for a mother than to see her children fighting each other?
So she decides to take sides.
So she decides to take sides, evidently, yeah.
This point of interest on the page, 43. Sometimes I think, well, how is it a point of interest? But, about tithing and about God staying near to Jacob and about his bargaining, because I think we have a little bargaining again there. At the very end where, he says that God will be with me and will keep me in this way that I go and give me bread and, you know, to eat and clothing to wear and come to my father's house in peace. Well, you know, I mean, let's just help me out here. And, then he says, then I will surely give 1/10 to you. And, but to use this as a big point of interest surprises me. Because, the 1/10 but mostly the bargaining.
The big F men.
Yeah.
Yeah,
With God.
yeah, yeah. And we've seen bargaining with God, haven't we? When did we see that? Last week.
In the Tale of Sodom. where-
Abraham bargains
Bargaining.
with God, doesn't he? Yeah. Right.
10%, and then John the Baptizer wanted half, and Jesus wanted everything.
Like the image of Jacob's ladder, that's always sort of fascinating me. Because it's not one fell swoop, you just go up or you come down, but it's a journey. And sometimes you go forward, sometimes you come back. And so that whole journey of faith is an evolutionary process as you climb that ladder. Or as God sends his messages down the ladder.
Yeah.
It's a powerful image.
It is. And now we're moving into kind of the next section. So I'm going to bring the mic over to Pam and she'll kind of coordinate this discussion. Just to close out that first section, I think that we get this really painful and heart-wrenching kind of image of the consequences of Jacob's actions with Esau kind of crying out, is there nothing left for me? It's really, I find it very hard to read. And then I'll note also that in last week's story, I guess, we had Ishmael and his mother Hagar being driven out into the wilderness. This time it's Jacob who's being driven out. So Pam, why don't you lead us to this
Okay.
next section?
This next section, I'm gonna just to let you know what most of you know that know me know I'm a linear kind of person. So we're gonna kind of take it piece by piece by piece. And where I'm gonna stop is Joseph's rise to power and David will continue. one of the things that I looked at as I was preparing for this today was basically the symbolism of the dream. And you gave a very nice interpretation of that. And I wanted to share another slight variation of that was was that God connecting heaven and earth together and God coming down and letting Jacob know that he was with him even in the darkness and letting us know that he is with us always. That God was bringing that letter down to actually break through to humanity. But with that dream, what I wanted to ask is, some of us have experienced God in, sometimes it's called the thin places, but where have you experienced God the most clearly? Do you have have you experienced, is there a special place that you experience God's presence?
When my father was extremely ill, we lived in West Virginia. He lived in New Mexico, and he had his second wife. And, he had kids in school, I was working, and I would get these phone calls. The dad's really very, very ill, you need to come. Well, needless to say, there was a lot to be done to come. So one time, I got one of those calls, and so I got on the airplane and I flew to Mexico. And you have to understand, I was just right in my 40s. I was not nearly as knowledgeable as I am now with people and illness. So, I get to Roswell and go to their house, and my dad's on oxygen in a rocking chair. And his wife says, "Oh, I'm just exhausted. I'm going to go stay with some friends." So she left. I was like, la, la, la. Now what do you do? So anyway, I truly felt like God was with me, helping me do some plans. I went to see my godmother. She gave me some ideas, and you got to get somebody to oversee his care at home. He was still extremely knowledgeable and knew what was going on. And so I made some phone calls, and I hadn't lived in Roswell in a long, long time. Made some phone calls, and the people I talked to said, "Well, you need to get somebody that oversees, the caregivers." Well, I had no idea if my father had one penny or a million pennies. So I went to the accountant and said, "Does he have enough money to pay for caregivers?" "Yes, ma'am, he does." I said, "Okay, that's all I need to know." So I started calling around to get like a caregiver that oversaw everybody. And word of mouth, I called and talked with the lady, and she said, "I'm just overwhelmed right now because I've got 2 clients that I'm taking care of them, and I can't do it." And I said, "Can you suggest anybody?" And she said, "I'll think about it." So, time was coming on. I'd been in 3 or 4 days and all this, and the kids got home, and husband saying, "Oh, I'm gonna go there to go to school," all these fun things. And so I really, really, really thought about it. And I said, "I've got to have some help. I just have to." And the next day, the woman that was overseeing other caregivers called me back, and she said, "Pam, I'll do it." And by her doing that, we were able to get caregivers to come, but if one didn't come, she knew somebody to call. And I was able to tell my dad's wife, "We've got it, all under control. She wasn't a bad caregiver, but she just didn't really know how to do care." And got that all taken care of. And there is no doubt in my mind that God did it. I just felt that way. And I was able to leave comfortably, knowing that he was going to be taken care of, that there were people that were going to come, when we needed help and all that, and it all worked out right. Now I really do thank God.
Well, some of us think that we are traditional places that people go to experience God might be the mountaintop, or might be the forest or the ocean or places like that. Have you ever had an experience with God or experienced God in a particularly unlikely place? And what was that like?
I had a car accident when I was 18 on St. Stephen's School Road. Now, it was not the same as it is now. It was a very windy, dark road. And I went to St. Stephen's School to see a boyfriend. And on the way back, I went off the cliff. I was just kind of hanging there.
Oh my goodness.
And I got out of the car and it was just pitch dark. No light at all, no moon. And I just started praying the Lord's Prayer and praying that whoever came along the road, if they did, were nice people. And sure enough, some people came by and they said they would take me to my dorm, and they did. And so it turned out to be okay, but it was very scary, and I depended on God to get me through that.
I bet.
I think to your question, what I have found is if I've got to do some work, like preparing for this class or preparing for EFM class or whatever, I need to find a place.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have a kind of a study on the front of our house that's got a picture window looking out at the oak trees and the deer and all that sort of stuff. And I take a hard table and put it up against that window, and I close the doors and and I sit there. And most times I put it off too long and I'm kind of scrambling a little bit. And then just sitting there and letting things work, it all works. So I think it's important to have a place to go to.
Okay. Anybody else?
Well, I don't know if this fits in that same category, but it was simultaneously. I had a wife that was undergoing liver transplant. My brother, who had a brain tumor, was having marital difficulties and had a very terrible divorce going on. And my mother fell and broke her hip, and she was living alone up in New York. And so I was trying to deal with my brother in Washington, D.C., my brother in New York, my wife back home in Dallas. And I got this overwhelming feeling, I'm the only one, and somehow I managed my way through it, but I would not have been able to make it through it without God's help. It's plain and simple.
I also wanted to talk about the pivotal moment in Jacob's life when he wrestled with the man. Let's think about that. Was it a man? Was it God? Was it an angel, an archangel? And after that moment, Jacob believes he has seen God face to face. Most of us can look at this wrestling as a metaphor. And how do you think it's a good metaphor for our life of faith? Wrestling. What do we wrestle with? Mm-hmm.
Been there and done that. Yeah. When my little sister died, I was mad at God,
Okay.
hated God. And it took a long time and constant God tapping on my shoulder and stuff to come back to me and let me born.
Okay.
And it was an awful experience.
I think the thing that Wilson talked about, wrestling with yourself.
Yes.
I thought that was a great.
Okay. Very good. Yeah.
I think in today's time, we wrestle with abortion, we wrestle with gay and lesbian, and all that we're just bombarded with, and the rules, and where are they gonna go to the bathroom, and should they get there and go there? I think it's like this, but it's in today's time.
Okay.
Well, there's interior wrestling, I would say,
Yeah.
and then what the world gives us to wrestle with. And they're both difficult.
Yes. Yeah.
But this seems to be quite interior. Because it's also about faith. So we've got plenty.
Karen and I went through some wrestling. We had our daughter. And then we wanted another child. And then the doctor said she could have any more children. And so we started thinking about adoption. Went to Edmonton, home in Fort Worth, to a lot of places. But my wrestle with myself, could I love someone we adopted versus someone that was our natural child? And I really had a problem. Because I was scared I would love one as much as I loved the other. But then, 6 years, Karen got pregnant. When all the doctors said she could. But that wasn't God.
Well, there was a wrestling and then there was a blessing
Right.
with your wrestling. Well, I just have a few minutes because I have to go and, as I call it, suit up. So, we've already talked a little bit about the theme of sibling rivalry. And one of the things I wanted to ask you is, in all these stories that we read about, I mean, just in this section here, there's several different sets of sibling rivalry. And as Bob pointed out, that's kind of a theme that goes through the Bible. What do you think about that? What do you think in terms of how this is presented, that it gives us what do you think it gives us an opportunity to think about in our own lives, as well as what's in the discussion? What do we see at the end? There is the sibling rivalry, and then what? Yes, forgiveness. And so, for me, at least, that was how I made sense of, why does this keep happening? You know, why does this keep coming up? And it seems to be perhaps a theme that we forgive our siblings, God forgives us. We forgive those who betray us, and God forgives us, because sometimes we betray God. Anything else? And I did because of my counseling background, I did look up why people get involved in sibling rivalry. What do you think that's about? What do you think? Well, that was one answer, but from a psychological standpoint, usually the kids see it from a fairness perspective, and that's actually what we saw get played out in the context of what we read, is fairness, what the parents do. You know, Rebecca had her favorite, Isaac had his favorite, Joseph was a favorite, his brothers weren't. And so it all gets down to, how are you treated? How's the punishment delved out? How's the attention delved out? And so there you go. So what gets played out here gets played out in our world.
Although we can learn that fairness doesn't always mean equal.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. And sometimes what we perceive to be unjust is maybe just different, as opposed to being unjust.
Well, I think the expectation between siblings is that everything's gonna be smooth, and it's not, so it's
No.
exaggerated.
Yeah.
Issues are exaggerated where it might be, if it wasn't a sibling, you just pass it off.
Right.
But the expectation is, particularly of parents of siblings, is that everybody's gonna love each other. What my son said one time, if he wasn't my brother, I wouldn't like him at all. So, that's just a point.
Being
And
very
that's
honest.
difficult for someone, I'm an only child. And, you know, you've always heard blood is thicker than water and all this. And this is very hard for me to understand because in sibling rivalry, I mean, I feel like, you know, everybody should be treated, you know, equally and fine. And everybody should get along. And if they don't, well, then, you know, let them go do their thing. Don't keep going back, you know, and trying to rectify this. So that's very hard for me to understand. And, Mom has a brother that some days we just want to shoot him. And then he comes back and Mom forgives him and it starts all over again. It's very hard for me to have to say, okay, let him go do his thing, let's forget it. So, you know, I think when you come to family like this, they keep coming back, they keep coming back. You know, family dynamics are not always easy.
Thank y'all.
Thank you, Pam.
Okay.
Another thing that ties into the family dynamic, and we'll kind of move on to the end of the story.
We will tend, many of us, to identify with, when we encounter these family struggles, we will tend to identify with people in the Bible based on whether we are an only child, an older sibling, a younger sibling. I think, Pam, you're kind of a responsible older sister, aren't you? Right? I'm the oldest child in my family. See, we've got people, I read these stories and I'm like, yep, there's that bratty younger sibling, you know, conniving, you know, Joseph, Jacob, you know, and I get aggravated.
Yeah,
And the middle child, and that's a whole different deal. Yeah.
yeah.
And I don't know that there are any stories that I can think of in the Bible that are explicitly about the middle child. It's often kind of the older or the younger.
Yeah.
They just left them out because they were so bad.
Yeah.
The Bible's about one son.
That one,
One son.
We know.
Yeah.
The only.
Yeah. Yeah.
If I could jump in, I don't know if y'all can hear me.
Yeah.
This is Barb. I don't know if my name's popping up on the screen or not.
It is,
Anyway, one of the things that stood out to me was the thing with the blessing, that Isaac only had one blessing to give. He could
Mhm.
only bless one of his sons. And at the end, when Jacob is blessing, he blesses all of his sons. So I don't know if that was because of lessons learned but there was a change there, that he blesses all of his sons at the end.
Yeah. That's a really great point. And it's really striking with the story of Isaac's blessing, that somehow he only has one blessing and that's it. Seems to kind of limit God's power in a way, doesn't it? And so maybe we are sort of moving to a more expansive understanding of blessing.
There's a single sentence in there about Esau, about them reconciling Jacob and Esau,
Mhm.
which I think is powerful. So
That was,
that just covers what we're just talking about, and that reconciliation is key to doing the right thing.
And Esau had said, I am about to die.
Mhm.
So he was really depressed.
I think one of the things that we're talking about reconciliation, I think one of the things that challenges me is reconciling the Old Testament to the New Testament. Because we try to sort of insert things in there that haven't yet emerged as part of the faith.
Mhm.
And we're dealing with an entirely different kind of society in Old Testament times. And it just sometimes doesn't work. I mean, at least I can't reconcile the kind of second. I'll accept it. That's it. Period.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Mhm.
And I think it's one of the benefits to reading the Bible the way that we're doing now. You may notice that we're really focusing on, we're not reading backwards through the lens of Jesus. We're really focusing on the stories within the context that they originally occurred and in which they were originally told, which I think is a great, I'd not really thought about that, but now that we've been meeting for a couple of times, it does occur to me that that's the way that we're staying kind of focused, which is great.
Thou shalt not homogenize.
Thou shalt not homogenize, which unfortunately we're going to do when it comes to the Gospels, but that's another story. We'll get there later.
And the vast majority of the book, I was just looking to see how many chapters, is the Old Testament. 15 out of 24.
So we're nearing the end of our time. There's one, I guess we haven't gotten to talk too much about Joseph's rise to power. We talked a little bit about the reconciliation between Jacob and Esau, right? We're going to see another story of fraternal reconciliation, aren't we? That's going to close out this chapter. And when we kind of looked at that, I think Kim used two words, forgiveness and reconciliation. So I wonder if those are the same thing. And do we see either or both of those occur at the end of this book? What do y'all think?
At the end of the chapter.
At the end of the chapter, sorry.
If any way you can reconcile unless you can.
I think that's probably true.
Yes.
That has to be the first step.
Mhm.
When that doesn't occur, then you're not gonna go to the next step.
Wouldn't it take two to reconcile, but one to forgive?
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
I think I would agree with that.
And you keep forgiving and keep forgiving and keep forgiving, and you don't reconcile. What do you do in that instance?
Mhm.
That's the issue.
Well, building off of that, it seems to me like reconciliation is a deeper thing than forgiving. I can forgive, I forgive you. But then unless I work the relationship out with you and do different, I haven't completed the work. So
That's right. So.
I see reconciliation is kind of more trying to balance the conflict.
Mhm.
Give some area that you both agree on, or at least in your head, you agree this is the right answer to something, whereas forgiveness, it's just something you feel, maybe from the heart, and say, I love this person, or, I'm going to forgive this person. They're human, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Did you?
I like the dream aspect of Joseph and how it did him so many good things with the Pharaoh and with the people
Mhm.
and with his brothers. But again, we go back to this dreaming. And he had been given the gift by God and was able to parlay that into a wonderful career and to do meaningful things for lots and lots of people.
Yeah.
Including the bringing of his family back in together and showing his love to them and their love for him. But this was all created by his gift of dreaming.
Yeah, and to close this discussion, I guess what I want to point out about forgiveness and reconciliation, it seems like we have repeated Joseph telling his brothers, do not be distressed or angry with yourselves. The first one occurs at the top of page 49. And there he forgives his brothers. And this gets to what Jane was saying. It's really kind of just a one-way Joseph forgives his brothers. On the next page, page 50, their motives may not have been very good, but the brothers come to Joseph and they admit fault. They take accountability. I think you've got confession. And then what I see is something that looks more like reconciliation because there's an acceptance of fault. So I think that it looks like a retelling of the same kind of theme, but in a way, I think it's different in a significant way.
And it took a while to get there.
Yeah. So we have a song we're gonna play. This is we talk a little bit about some of the arts related to some of these things. And while the song is playing, I'm going to pass around two things. One is Children of God. This is a book by Desmond Tutu. If you're ever looking for a good children's Bible, this one is the way to go, in my opinion. There are lots of good ones out there, but I love this one. I read this to Samuel a lot when he was younger, and Joseph had a favorite piece of artwork in this book that he looked at over and over and over again, and it's this one. And I'll pass this around. It's Joseph being sold into slavery by his brothers. It's I find it to be a very upsetting picture. It's violent. And I always thought it was really weird that this was the one that Samuel always went to. It didn't occur to me until I'd been reading him this story for a year or two that we took Samuel from his home and brought him to a faraway land when we adopted him from Colombia. So I don't know if there was anything going on there, but anyways, I think it's a really neat piece of artwork. The other one, I'll pass this one around going the other way. This is a quote that is found on a memorial that has been placed next to the balcony at the Lorraine Motel, where Martin Luther King was shot and killed. And there's a memorial that's been placed there with a quote. It says, this is a King James Version quote, I believe. They said one to another, behold, here cometh the dreamer. Let us slay him, and we shall see what will become of his dreams. Now, how powerful is that? They killed the dreamer, not the dream, right? So I'll pass this around so you can see that as well. And we'll listen to a song by John Hartford.
First, we have to work my way through the YouTube ad.
I want to personally thank all you EFMers, that's what we call them, in our house, for coming to this and adding so much. For the ones that have not done EFM, you all just add to the stories, you add to the understanding, and I just want to thank all of you all so much for coming.
Thank you for listening.
How have you escaped doing EFM all these years?
Yeah. That was nice.
Now Joseph had a dream when he was just a boy of 17. He dreamt his older brothers then would someday be his son. And he told this to his father, and his brothers, they got mad and tried to kill him. Now his father just took note, but his brothers, they got mad and tried to kill him. Joseph was a young man with 11 older brothers. He was given by his parents a coat of many
fun song and a great, great way just to lay out the story. Yeah. And now you can go home and listen to Emmylou Harris's Coat of Many Colors.
I thought that was Dolly's song.
Dolly wrote it, you're correct. You're correct. Dolly wrote that song. I'm just kind of partial.
I am too.
Dolly's pretty great.
So
Thank y'all very much.
we'll have a break for a couple of weeks. We have
That's right.
Thanksgiving weekend next week, first Sunday of Advent, December 4th. The week after that is the Giving Fair, which will be going on during this time. December 11th, we have a special class with Jane Walton right here on the labyrinth. We have our new portable labyrinth. We'll be out in the parish hall, walking and learning and engaging. Having fun, definitely. And so on the 18th, so that's like almost a month from now, we'll be back with the beginning of the Moses story. Can't remember how the next chapter, I am who I am, God reveals God's name. Stay tuned. It'll be awesome.
So David being a rock and roller, you know what famous rock and roller died in October?
In October?
Who knows? Early Lewis died.
Yeah. Yeah, he was pretty amazing.
It's pretty amazing. He lived under a cloud.
What's that?
I think he lived under a cloud most of his life because he married his 13-year-old cousin.
Yeah,
But he could have been just fit right in with this story.
exactly. That's right. That's right.
It's always a pleasure.